You said yes to the dinner. You showed up. You smiled. You laughed. You held conversations. You were present. And then you got home, closed the door behind you, and felt like you'd just run a marathon without moving your legs. The next morning? Worse. Not sad exactly. Not sick. Just hollow. Like someone left every window open inside your mind and now there's nothing left but a draft. And you thought, why does everyone else bounce back? And I need days. Maybe you've told yourself you're just bad at being social. Maybe you've wondered if something is fundamentally wrong with the way you're wired. But here's what psychology actually tells us. Nothing is wrong. Your brain isn't broken. It isn't weak. It processes the world differently. And that difference has a name, a science, and, believe it or not, a purpose. There's a name for what you feel the morning after a social event. And no, it's not regret. Researchers sometimes call it a social hangover. That heavy, foggy, drained state that settles in after prolonged interaction. And it's not in your head. It's in your neurochemistry. Here's why. Extroverted brains tend to run on a dopamine-dominant reward system. Social stimulation hits, and they get a surge, energy, excitement, more pleas. But for introverted brains, the dominant pathway leans more toward acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter tied to deep thinking, calm focus, and internal reflection. Social settings still activate your dopamine system, but it's like running software your hardware wasn't optimized for. It works, but it costs more. Think of it like two phones at the same party. One has a battery built for streaming, bright, loud, always on. The other has a battery built for reading, deep processing, running background tasks. Both phones work, but one drains in 2 hours. That doesn't mean it's a worse phone. It means it was built for a different kind of power. So when you come home and collapse into silence, that's not failure. That's your system doing exactly what it was designed to do, returning to the environment where it operates best. Here's something most people don't realize. While you were at that party, your brain was doing triple the work. Not because you're anxious, not because you're overthinking, because you're processing. Psychologist Elaine Aron identified a trait called sensory processing sensitivity, found in roughly 15 to 20% of the population. People with this trait don't just hear the conversation. They absorb the tone, the micro-expressions, the shift in someone's posture when they say, "I'm fine," but clearly aren't. They register the lighting, the background noise, the emotional undercurrent of a room, all at once. Compare that to someone who walks into the same room and simply hears words and sees faces. Both are valid, but one brain is running 5 browser tabs, the other is running 50, and half of those tabs are analyzing the other half. That's not a flaw, that's depth, but depth has a metabolic cost. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, self-monitoring, and social navigation, is working overtime. And just like a muscle after a long workout, it needs rest. Not because it's weak, but because it was used. So when you wake up the next day still feeling the weight of last night's conversations, that's not you being dramatic. That's your brain finishing a job it started hours ago. There's a hidden cost to being on that nobody sends you a bill for until the next morning. Psychologist John Sweller called it cognitive load, the total amount of mental effort being used in working memory at any given time. And in social settings, that load multiplies fast. You're not just talking, you're monitoring how you're coming across, adjusting your energy to match the group, filtering what to say and what to hold back, reading the room, and managing your own internal state, all simultaneously. That's not conversation, that's performance. Picture an actor on stage for 3 hours. When the curtain falls, no one says, "Why are you tired? You were just talking." Everyone understands. Performing is exhausting, even when you love the role. Now imagine doing that, without a script, without rehearsal, and without the audience knowing it's a performance at all. That's what social interaction can feel like when your brain is wired for depth over speed. You gave something real in that room. You showed up with presence, with attention, with emotional investment, and the tax on that, the quiet heaviness the next day, isn't a sign that you failed. It's proof that you gave something that mattered. And then comes the part that might be worse than the exhaustion itself. The guilt. You look around and everyone else seems fine. Your friend posted a story from the same event at midnight and was at brunch by 9. Meanwhile, you canceled your Saturday plans and haven't left your bed. Psychologist Leon Festinger describes something called social comparison theory. The idea that we constantly evaluate ourselves by measuring against others. And in a world that rewards extroversion, where being social is healthy and being alone is concerning, the comparison becomes a trap. You start telling yourself a story. Maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe I'm ungrateful. Maybe I don't actually like people. But none of those are true. You're judging your internal experience against someone else's external highlight reel. That's like a fish feeling ashamed for needing water after 15 minutes on land, because the bird next to it seems fine in the air. Now, let's be honest. If your need for recovery is consistently accompanied by deep distress, emotional numbness, or an inability to function for extended periods, that's worth exploring with someone you trust, like a therapist or counselor. There's a difference between a personality trait and a pattern that's causing real suffering. But for most people watching this, the guilt is doing more damage than the exhaustion ever did. So what's actually happening in your brain during those quiet hours and slow days after socializing? Something important. Neuroscience research points to the default mode network, a system in the brain that activates when you're not focused on the outside world. It's responsible for self-reflection, memory consolidation, daydreaming, and making meaning from experience. When you withdraw after social interaction, you're not shutting down. You're switching on a different system, one that helps you process what just happened, store what mattered, and release what didn't. There's also something called optimal arousal theory, based on the Yerkes-Dodson curve. Every person has a sweet spot of stimulation where they function best. Too little, and you feel bored. Too much, and you feel overwhelmed. For people who process deeply, that sweet spot sits lower on the stimulation scale, not because they're fragile, but because their bandwidth is allocated differently. Think of it like soil. A farmer doesn't plant the same field every season without rest. The fallow period, the quiet, the stillness, is what makes the next harvest possible. Recovery isn't emptiness, it's restoration. So the next time you spend a full day in silence after a social weekend, know this: your brain isn't hiding from the world. It's composting everything it absorbed into something richer. Let me ask you something. What if recovery wasn't the problem, but the proof that you gave something real? Self-determination theory, developed by psychologists Dacey and Ryan, says that human beings thrive when 3 needs are met: autonomy, competence, and connection. Notice that last one, connection. Not constant socializing, not performance, connection. And the kind of connection that people like you tend to offer. Attentive, meaningful, deeply present, takes more energy precisely because it's more real. You didn't just show up at that gathering. You listened, you noticed, you held space for someone's story when everyone else had moved on to the next topic. And the price you paid afterward wasn't a punishment. It was an exchange. Energy for depth, presence for meaning. The story you've been telling yourself, that you're too sensitive, too slow to recharge, too much effort. That story was written by a world that confuses volume with value. But you get to rewrite it. You're not antisocial. You're selective. You're not broken. You're processing. You're not falling behind. You're operating on a rhythm the world hasn't learned to respect yet, but you can. And that starts with one small shift: treating your recovery as sacred, not shameful. You don't need to recover less. You need to stop apologizing for recovering at all. Your quiet days aren't wasted days. They're the days that make every meaningful conversation, every real connection, every moment of presence possible. If this helped you see your recovery differently, leave a like. If you want more videos about the psychology of people like us, subscribe. You belong here.